Retro Quickies, The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Man, if there was anything that made me feel old, it was being reminded that I grew up on reruns of shows like this. Back when Cartoon Network was mostly just broadcasting syndicated versions of classic animation libraries, the time before the cartoon line, stuff like Rocky and Bullwinkle was a consistent rebroadcast. And of course, it got an NES game adaptation like so many other licenses, but unlike weird picks like the Alien series or Platoon, Rocky and Bullwinkle, due to the serialized nature of the cartoon itself, does actually make sense for a video game. You have your obvious heroes, your obvious bad guys who are always up to no good, and the various cartoon hijinks that they get up to, which could make a good setup for various level themes. Unfortunately, that's not what the final product ended up being. After a super fast series of company splash screens, including a surprising appearance by THQ of all publishers, may they rest in peace, we're greeted with a title screen that, I'll be honest, made me think I was playing an unlicensed Color Dreams game for a second. But no, this is an officially licensed product, the very first game developed by Radical Entertainment, kicking off a very, very long history of releasing games of wildly varying quality and subject matter. If you're curious, the last major release from this company was Prototype 2 back in 2014, but they are still kicking around to this day, mostly as a nebulous support studio inside Activision. Oh, that thunder and lightning can't be a good thing. But it all started here, and boy, what a place to begin. The plot of this game is fairly analogous to a plotline you get in the show itself. Rocky and Bullwinkle have to make their way to the abominable manor to pick up an inheritance from a deceased relative of Bullwinkle's, while they are constantly accosted along the way by primarily evil agents Boris and Natasha, who are attempting to stop them from claiming the money, presumably to steal it later. Of course, there's no real presentation about it. The most you get for the plot is a single title card during the intro crawl before the title screen. There's no real transition between stages or anything, you just bop from one area to the next until you reach your destination. And right away, gotta say, the game's not much of a looker. And hey, the original cartoon wasn't exactly what one would call gorgeous either, not even sporting backgrounds half the time, with really simple, jerky animations held together with the hopes and dreams of those that drew them, but for the time it was released, it was kind of the standard for TV-level animation. The game, on the other hand, was released in 1992, well after the Super Nintendo's debut. I could honestly forgive the cheap look of the game, as at least the sprite art actually does reflect the look of the show fairly accurately, and at least it does have backgrounds as opposed to the show it's based on. But then you actually start playing it, and things fall apart really quickly. The controls are the major issue for this game. On paper, it does seem like it should work alright for a duo-based platformer. You can switch between Rocky and Bullwinkle, and they both share the same basic moves. They can run, jump, pick up items, and throw bombs, which you have a limited supply of. But the game is honestly very generous with how many bombs it gives you. Each of them has their own special ability that they can perform as well. Bullwinkle can charge at enemies, which is basically the only way to attack apart from throwing bombs, and can walk upstairs. Yes, this is an ability only Bullwinkle possesses, and of course, Rocky can fly, or rather he can super jump, which, if used properly, can trivialize a lot of areas in the game, if you also get lucky. But unfortunately, this game controls awfully. There is a very definite delay when moving, and both characters carry a lot of momentum when they move, and especially when they jump, making precision platforming almost impossible. Plus, when moving, Rocky and Bullwinkle are always moving close to the side of the screen you're moving towards, making it very hard to react to new obstacles in front of you, not helped by the fact that enemies can attack from off-screen. The bombs you throw travel in an arc, and there's also a delay to when they're thrown. While you can hold them and delay the throw intentionally to run down its timer, hold it for too long and it'll blow up in your face. However, since the bombs don't detonate on impact, you still have to time it very carefully to actually hit enemies that move around a lot. The worst part, though, is that your controls just sort of lock up at times, usually when you take damage. Since your iframes are very limited, it's very easy to get stun locked as you just lose the ability to move or jump when you slam into an enemy. That's very easy to do, because again, your momentum is so pronounced that dodging around or jumping over enemies is pretty tough. And this is a minor thing in the grand scheme of things, but it bothers me that I have to stop and hit down to pick up items. You need to grab keys in order to progress in certain areas, so it slows you down a lot more than you would think, especially when you're trying to dodge around enemy fire. Most of the time, in order to keep yourself alive, you're going to be relying on each character's special movement options. Bullwinkle's charge is much more reliable to take out enemies in front of you, and does grant you some iframes against certain attacks. And of course, Rocky's super jump lets you just jump over enemies you otherwise would have had to engage with. But unfortunately, these moves aren't free. When you use them, they will slowly drain your health, so you can't spam them. Which is a shame because they're the thing that makes the game fairly bearable. There are also areas where you have to use things like Rocky's super jump in order to clear the areas. Like this part where you have to precariously jump across what I think are supposed to be futuristic Jetsons homes, but they could also just be like Transformers up on power poles, I don't know. And then the unbearable controls are compounded when you run into these weird confusion bombs that show up in several areas. If you're caught in the word balloons they release, and they follow you, by the way, your controls will be reversed for a long time. And it also makes it impossible for you to use your special abilities as well, so Rocky's super jump basically becomes useless when this happens. It's not a particularly long game, and admittedly, the game does feature some pretty generous checkpoints all throughout each level, but all of its quirks and problems make it unfairly challenging, which I suppose shouldn't be too surprising with a licensed NES game made by a very new team. But those checkpoints don't do much for you when it's made clear that you don't get any continues. There is a continue code, but it requires a code being entered during gameplay on the second controller, which I do not have. You lose all of your lives, you go back to the beginning, and lives are in short supply. 4 lives to start out might seem decent, but when you can easily lose them due to getting caught in a buzzsaw trap while your controls are reversed, or your inputs keep getting eaten so you slide off the edge of a platform to a bottomless pit, you're gonna lose that initial pool very quickly. There are other lives to pick up here and there, but they're usually well out of the way behind obstacles that require you to risk losing a lot of health or more lives just trying to pick them up. Ironically, this does lead to you being able to spam regenerating items, since items and enemies respawn every time you scroll their location off screen. With enemies, this is very annoying, especially with multi-hit enemies like Boris and Natasha, but with items, it is an unintended godsend. You'll notice that most of the footage from this game is from the first 3 levels, and that's because I ended up getting incredibly frustrated with this game. I generally don't mind playing a subpar game, trying to get as far as I can to show off as much of the game as I can, but with the way this game controls combined with its other issues, it is legitimately a tough game to play through. I even looked up a playthrough of the game along with a manual, which is how I even figured out the characters had special abilities, and I still couldn't get very far into it. It's not even a matter of practice, I don't think, as the controls of the game just feel so broken and unresponsive that very few of the deaths I took or the mistakes I made felt like they were genuinely my fault, and I had to listen to this as a soundtrack the whole way through. The music loops are really short, really annoying, and despite how short they are, it infuriates me that the music just stops and then restarts from the beginning every time you transition to a new area. It's a very small thing, but with how repetitive the music already is, it's another annoyance on top of a pile of annoyances that add up to this game just not being very fun, not very interesting, not very funny, and has aged very poorly when put up against many of its contemporaries. In fact, what else was released the same year this game came out? Mega Man 4, Bucky O'Hare, Monsters in My Pocket, Dragon Warrior 3, Darkwing Duck, Dragon Warrior 4. Yeah, seriously, 2 of the Dragon Warrior games were released within like 3 months of each other here in the States. Prince of Persia. You get the idea. Despite the NES being pretty long in the tooth at this point, bangers were still coming out pretty frequently for it. And while it isn't like this was the only bad game that came out in '92, there were plenty, it is a pretty big standout for just how bad it feels to play. Ironically, this puts it in stark contrast with the cartoon's contemporaries, who were all basically existing on the exact same level of quality during the time that they were made. Well, bad luck on that front, I suppose. Sorry guys, you just don't cut it anymore.